Previously, Bobby Fischerman and his friends successfully defeated the cave troll in a puzzle battle and escaped the crystal caves. They decided to head south toward the enchanted gardens and were traveling through a forest. Not long after they had entered the forest, they came upon a giant black bear. The bear said, "Stop right there. You can't take another step until you solve a puzzle." At this point, the friends were feeling pretty good because they had gotten pretty good at this puzzle thing with the help of Bobby, and they said, "Sure, what have you got?" The bear said, "Not so fast. There's three of you, which means you will each need to solve your own puzzle, and you can't help the other people." At this point, the fishermen were looking at each other and were starting to get nervous because what I haven't told you so far is much about the first two fishermen. See, the third fisherman, Bobby Fisherman, was an experienced chess player who was great at finding these crazy moves. The second fisherman's name was Joe, and they called him Average Joe. He was good at chess, but he wasn't great, and he certainly wasn't on Bobby Fisherman's level. And the first fisherman, his name was Peter Potzer. And they called him Peter Potzer because he was the worst chess player in the group. He was, you could say, a beginner, and he was who the fishermen were most worried about solving the puzzle correctly. At this point, the bear said, "You," and he pointed to Peter Potzer. "You're up. Here's your puzzle. See if you can solve it." The bear said, "It's white to play and win. White's pawns are going forward in this direction. Black's pawns are going down the board here. What should white play to win the game?" Now, before I tell you what Peter Potzer decided to do, if you would like to pause, how do you think white can win this position? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, let's take a look at what happened with Peter and the bear. So at this point, Peter Potzer said, "Well, I've heard that there's a saying in chess, passed pawns must be pushed. I think what I'm going to do is push my pawn forward." So he played the move b7, trying to get a queen. At this point, the bear moved h2, and Peter noticed that the bear was trying to also get a queen and decided, you know what, I better stop that. I think I need to play the move king to f2 to go hunt down this pawn before it becomes a queen. And he played the move king to f2. He failed to realize that his king was too far to actually stop the pawn, and the bear proceeded to get the queen. At this point, Peter Potzer said, "Oh, right, I couldn't actually catch the pawn. Well, I better make the best of this. Let me see what else I can do." And he started to look for checks because, well, he's a beginner and he likes to look for checks. He didn't see any right away, but he kept looking, thinking as hard as he could, and he noticed that if he pushed his pawn, instead of getting a queen, he could get a knight, and it would be a check. Extremely proud of himself, he made the move and yelled loudly, "Check!" The bear moved to d5, and again, Peter Potzer began looking for checks. And he noticed the move knight to c7 was another check, so he played that. And then the bear moved king to e5. And at this point, Peter grabbed the knight, was about to move it to c6 because he noticed it was another check, and he heard a voice in the back of his mind from many years ago. It was his friend, Bobby Fischerman, telling him, "Peter, before you make a move, do a blunder check." So Peter was like, okay, wait a second. Let me just do a blunder check. If I go here, what's going to happen? And he looked very carefully, and he noticed the queen would take his knight. And he was like, okay, let me not do that. Let me go here instead because this is also a check. And notice that the knights are taking away these squares, and so the only place that the bear could move was king to f4. And again, Peter grabbed the knight. He was about to move it to d5, but again, he heard that little voice in the back of his head. "Peter, do a blunder check." And he's like, okay, wait a second. This is important. Let me see. Oh, yes, the queen is still there. I can't do that. I better go to c6 instead. He played knight to c6 check. Sorry, knight to e6 check. The king moved over, and again, Peter started to look for a move. He noticed knight to e5 was another check, and he was about to play it, but again, he heard that little voice in the back of his head. Wait, do a blunder check. He noticed the pawn, and he played knight to f6 check instead, and the king had to move to h3. And at this point, he was about to play knight to f4 check when he heard another voice in the back of his head saying, "Wait, if you see a good move, look for a better move." So he was like, wait a second, do I have anything better than just going here? Oh yes, I can capture a pawn and get check at the same time. At this point, the bear moved king to h2, and Peter was about to play the move knight to f3 check when he said, wait a second, I don't want to go there. I'll lose my knight to the queen. I better not do that. Let me move this knight instead. and we'll see what happens from here. Played knight to g4 check, and the bear grunted and said, well, I guess you did solve that one correctly. Let's move on to the next person. At this point, Average Joe and Bobby Fischerman were ecstatic that somehow Peter Potzer had successfully solved this incredible puzzle and delivered checkmate with the 2 knights. Also notice that the blunder that Peter Potzer made earlier was a necessary move to throw in, otherwise this checkmate idea would not have been possible. At this point, the bear pointed to Average Joe and said, here is your puzzle, and he presented him with this position. He said it's white to play and draw the game. How can he do it? Before I tell you what Average Joe said, if you would like to pause, try to figure this out on your own at home, go ahead and do that now. Well, if you had a chance to look at that, here's what Average Joe was thinking. He noticed that there was an extra piece for black. There's the rook, a pawn, but black is the one with the extra bishop. And if black is given enough time, he's going to be able to march the king over, eventually using the bishop's help, win this pawn, and it's going to be a win for black. So white has to do something drastic and either win this pawn or create some sort of counterplay. And as he was looking around, he discovered the move rook to d7 check. It's a killer move, and the idea is twofold. Number one, the rook would like to come over here and potentially attack this pawn maybe from behind, but also the black bishop can't take the rook or it is a stalemate. Notice how white has no place to move the king to because all of those squares are taken away. So that's the move for white. Now at this point, black plays the move king to b8, sidestepping the check, and now actually threatening to take the rook. If you would like to pause, what's the move here for white? If you had a chance to do that, it's rook to d8 check, forking these guys, which actually forces black to bring the rook back to defend. Otherwise, black's going to lose the bishop. So black plays rook to c8. And now if you would like to pause again, what does white play here? If you had a chance to do that, of course, you can't take the rook because the king is going to take, and then you're going to lose your pawn, and you're going to lose the game. Also note that this is the same color as the bishop, which is exactly what black would want. And so there's definitely not going to be any chances to draw if you trade the rooks. But what you can do instead is rook to d4, putting pressure on that pawn over there. Because if you can capture this, white's going to be able to draw the game. But at this point, black has a brilliant move, king to b7. And it might look like this pawn is undefended, but that's actually not true. Because if you take this pawn, that's a huge blunder. And black's going to play the move rook to a8 check. You have to move here, and then watch this. Check, and you're getting skewered, and you lose the rook and the game. So very clever move there by black, setting that little trap. However, Average Joe knew that there was probably some sort of hidden trap, and he decided, you know what, I'm not going to take the pawn. I'm going to throw in some checks and see what happens. So he plays the best move, rook to b4 check. King to c7, and again, rook to c4 check. And Average Joe was thinking, hey, if he goes back, I'll just go back and forth, and I'll get the draw that way. Now black plays the move bishop to c6, and now there is a stunning move here. See if you can find it. Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move that white needs to play is rook takes h4. And those of you who are paying attention might say, wait a second, Nelson, doesn't that just lose the rook? Rook to a8 check? Rook to a4 check? You're losing your rook. What are you thinking? Actually, that's the exact idea because you go king to c5, and when black takes your rook, guess what? This is a stalemate. The king has nowhere to go, and the game is a draw. Average Joe was ecstatic that he somehow found that, and the bear grunted again and sent him on his way. It was only Bobby Fischerman left, and he had to solve the most difficult puzzle yet. The bear pointed to Bobby Fischerman and presented him with this puzzle. White's pawns are going forward, black's pawns are going this way. It's white to play and draw the game. Before I say anything else, if you would like to pause, what do you think the move is for white? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, let me just mention a few things. Normally, at the end of the game, when you have a queen, you're going to win, or there's at least some sort of perpetual check or something. This position is totally different. Black is actually threatening checkmate. So, for example, if you make a random move with the queen, black's going to go check and checkmate. And the other thing that black is threatening is just to get a queen here. So you have some major threats that you have to deal with, and you have no checks on black's king with your queen. So that's a massive problem for white. And even though, normally you look at this position like, oh, I have a queen, this must be good. No, this is far from good for white. Okay. So the only move here is bishop takes d4. And you might say, oh, we're just taking a pawn. No, you're not taking a pawn. What you're doing is creating an escape square for your king. Remember what I just showed you the checkmate? We want to avoid that. That's why we take the pawn, so that we can give our king some breathing room. All right, so black plays g3 check, and you have to run to g1. If you made the mistake and tried to run to h1, black's going to simply take here with check, forces you over, and then this guy over here, remember, becomes a queen, and you get checkmated like this. Okay, so that's a little pitfall to sidestep there. So king to g1, and now black plays the move h2 check. Now, if you would like to pause, what does white play here? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the only move that makes sense is king to h1, because if you played king takes f1, black's going to get a queen really either way, but you're in big trouble here. They're going to do that. They're going to take this, and black is totally winning. All right, so you have to go back to the corner, and now black has a really nice move. Bishop takes g2 check, forcing you to capture, and then they play the follow-up f3 check, and this is an extremely tricky position. What move should white play here? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, there's only 3 legal moves, 1, 2, and 3, but only one of them saves the game. If you capture the pawn, you allow this queen with a check, and black is just totally winning. You can move somewhere, and they're going to get another queen, and it's all over, okay? If you go to f1, again, black just gets a queen either way, and it just is a simple checkmate. You have to block, and they checkmate you. So the only move that you could play is king to h1. But you might be saying, Nelson, black's still going to get the queen, and you're still checkmated. Why did we do that? Well, you tell me. If you had a chance to look at that, it's not checkmate because we can block with the bishop, and even though it looks terrible, we're actually unleashing our queen so that this is a check, and black has to deal with the check, right? They can't take us and win the game. So how does black get out of the check? Well, there's actually an amazing move here that black plays, queen to b4. And it's like, wait, what? You're going to give up the queen with check? Why would you do that? Here's why. Because after the queen takes, black's going to play king to h3, and guess what? They're threatening checkmate, and notice the queen doesn't have any checks on our king because it can't get to that diagonal. If it was here, it could go like this with check. So if we just back up for a second, if black didn't throw in this move and just played king to h3, well, now there's a check, and you're going to get checked all day long if you're black, right? The queen's just going to come around, and you're never going to get out of the checks. But by playing queen to b4 first, now there's no checks, right? You can't get on that diagonal. So if you're white, what do you do in this position? Well, the only move for white here is bishop takes h2. And at first glance, it's like, wait, aren't we winning? Black's going to take us. We have a queen. We're going to just win the game, right? Wrong, because black plays the incredible move. Wait for it. f2. And again, they're threatening to checkmate you with the pawn. And what are you going to do? This is a threat, and this is a threat. They can get a queen, and that's going to be checkmate, or they can get a pawn. Push the pawn. So what do? White to play and not lose. Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the way that you save the game is the incredible queen to h4 check. Forces black to take. Then you follow it up with bishop takes g3 check, which is forking these pieces, by the way. And after black takes you, guess what? It's a stalemate. You can't move. The game is a draw. Wow. Luckily, Bobby Fischerman, of course, found that because he's Bobby Fischerman, and he escaped along with his friends, and the bear let them go. They continued south on their way to the Enchanted Gardens, and that's where we will pick up our story next time. I hope you guys enjoyed those puzzles. Bobby Fischerman, Average Joe, and Peter Potzer will return next time. As always, stay sharp, play smart, and take care.